Hello, everyone. I hope you had a nice Christmas and hope you are ready for some astrological insight as well with me and Donny. And we have decided to make a video on the upcoming Neptune and Mars square, which is going to be last until 2023. And also we're going to be looking at a couple of solar return and Mars return chart as well. So I think it's a great time actually to have a better understanding on Neptune and Mars aspects. We are specifically going to be focusing on this aspect, but you need to know that a chart should be looked at as a whole. By the way, if you like this video, then please press like and also hit the notification ring bell so that you know when we are up next. And if you wish to have a reading with us, then I'm going to be put the link also in the description box as well. So how are you doing, Donny?
Interesting 2021 to start off with. We've got a whole month of what I call a compression month because there's so many planets in Aquarius squaring planets in Taurus. So that's very interesting. I've actually, because in Asia, where I live is approaching the Chinese New Year anyways next month. So we're doing a lot of spring cleaning. So it's very metaphorically symbolic in many ways to spring clean and just declutter the whole house, that Taurus energy, like get rid of stuff and donate and, like put it to better use and all that. So
do you think that the year is going to be easier than 2020? What's your intake on that?
what's my intake? I've actually looked at the, what do you call that, the cyclic index from this French astrologer, Andrea Barbeau. And he basically plotted like with the years, like in terms of an index, the lower the index means that there's going to be more turbulence and unrest and war, financial crisis, whatever. We are actually just entering a 7 to 8 years low of that cyclic index. So it will only climb back to the early 2010s, I think around 2012 and 13 kind of index level when we hit to 2027. Okay. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that this 8 years, which is a Venus cycle, by the way, 8 years, from 2019 to 2027 is going to be this interesting times where existing structures are going to be dismantled. I mean, since we have 2021, 2022, that Uranus in waning square with that Saturn in waning square with Uranus. So it's about dismantling like existing structures. And there's going to be a lot of resistance for that. A lot of things, like a lot of, on a personal level, a lot of people will be letting go of things. So to start something new. And I can't help but mention that I think after the Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 Aquarius, I think it's in 2026, I think that's going to really solidify a really new beginning globally.
When I prepare financial forecasts, one of them I tend to be focusing on is the nodes. And in the last 150 years, astrologers have been following how the nodes and the financial market relates to each other. And 2018, 2019 were a peak, especially in the real estate. And unfortunately, it looks like somewhere between 2026 March till 2028, it's going to be hitting the rock bottom. So I'm expecting some financial crises at that time, and I think we are just leading up to it. And also, I tend to be looking at Neptune 14-year cycle as well, because Neptune is something to do with the inflation and the deflation. Now, usually when Neptune is in water signs, and everyone can go back and look at the history a little bit, how Neptune did in water signs. Actually, in water signs, it is doing okay. We don't need to be expecting major inflations, deflations. However, when Neptune is going to be entering the sign of Aries, which is, of course, a very fiery energy, and Neptune is full of water. So I'm expecting also Neptune causing some turbulence as well from 2026 onwards. So yes, this Saturn and Uranus square is all about restructuring what is happening at the moment, but I think it's just the preview of what else is coming up later on for us. So how do you feel about the Neptune-Mars square in the US Sibley chart?
I was actually digging what does Mars and Neptune on a mundane level actually mean. And actually Neptune, I must start with Neptune because Neptune can also represent war. Because it's about chaos and also delusions. But it's a war that is based on ideology differences.
Yeah.
And then since it's square to Mars, I mean, the US chart has that. And the US chart, I think, has got Mars in their seventh house, Placidus. So it's angular. And then it's squaring.
As well, it's in the seventh.
Yes. And but however, the Neptune is in the ninth house Placidus in Virgo. Virgo, on a mundane level, it rules like social order. So when it's square, people are like just kind of really going at it, and there's going to be a lot of division in which, you know, it's no surprise that we've been having that playing out already. And I'm sure that you've already done your inauguration video at this time. So there's, yes, and there's going to be a lot of anxiety. And not forgetting that this year we've got the nodes also immutable signs in the same modality as Mars in the US chart and also Neptune. So there's this kind of rounding up of like, you know, like what direction should we go?
You know, Neptune, I looked at when we had a Neptune-Mars square last, when it was in Pisces, because Neptune has got this 165-year cycle.
Right.
So Neptune tends to be spending 14 years in one sign. So the very last time when we had the exact aspect between Neptune and Mars from Pisces to Gemini, it was between 1857 to 1860. And those few years were full of panic. So, for instance, a couple of banks, I mean, the banks closed down in New York, for instance, for 2 months. And you mentioned that Neptune can indicate war in mundane astrology. Yeah, some ideology type of fighting for a higher cause type of thing. But Neptune also in mundane level talks about music, fashion, actually through socialism, ideal society, religion, vision, unions, institutions, and people who are promoting their visions, but also people who are cheaters and cause confusion for us. So I think with this Mars square, what I really imagine is that we want to be switching off the fog machine. People don't want to be in denial anymore. And one of your favorite topic I know is out of bound planets. And Mars is actually out of bound in the US Sibley chart. And out of bound planets are full of Uranian flair. So we need to imagine that like Mars having a conjunction to Uranus. So it's like Neptune square Uranus also at the same time. I made a video on that a couple of months ago. So I put the link above in case you want to get to know a little bit more about out of bound energies. But Mars is a very increased masculine energy. It's more assertive, it's more aggressive. And with that Uranian flavor to it, it is all about destructive behavior. But on a positive level, it could indicate heightened creativity as well.
Mm.
So what shall we expect with Neptune-Mars square then? Loads of scandals.
Lots of scandal, and also Neptune rules oil as well. So the fight for oil. So there'll be something regarding that, maybe starting a war because of the acquisition of oil fields in other countries.
I completely agree, because Neptune is in the fourth house. So if we look at the meaning of the fourth house a little bit on mundane level, that talks about lands, the owners of the lands, the workers on the lands, crops, farming, mining industry. And by the way, between 1857 to 1860, gold was something which was very precious, and people were making very good money from gold. The building, the real estate belongs to the fourth house. And Neptune being there, it could indicate loss of properties, for instance, through floods as well. Or we're talking about the supplies that feed the nation from beneath the earth. So the gas industry, even the water supply with that Neptune could be very prominent. Yeah.
Also, the US chart is undergoing a rare transit Neptune opposite natal Neptune as well. Because in the US chart, natal Neptune in the US chart is in Virgo, and now we've got an opposition, Neptune opposition, so to speak, which is rare in a country's chart. And they're all squaring that Mars in the seventh house in the US Sibley chart. So the last time Neptune by transit opposes natal Neptune, I think it was back in 1857 to 1859, just before the previous civil war known as the Bleeding Kansas year actually occurred. Yeah. And that particular war in 1857 to 59 is marked by an extremely polarized political ideas or ideals and growing uncertainty about the future of the USA as a nation. How uncanny that now they are exactly where it was back in the mid 1800s.
Absolutely. So Neptune, the two Neptunes are basically forming a T-square with yes. Mars. Yes. And Mars is in the seventh house in the whole sign system. And seventh house talks about alliances, people we make agreement with, also our open enemies as well. So with that Gemini, actually, maybe US is going to be making some very powerful agreements with other countries, and especially around some of the shortages of maybe supplies. Of course, it can be crops, it can be food related as well, because natally Neptune is in the sign of Virgo. Mm. But overall, I'm guessing it's going to be affecting their agriculture quite a lot.
Right.
Okay, and then you said you looked at a solar return chart as well as a Mars return chart, right?
Actually, yeah. Can I share my screen? I actually looked at both Mars and solar, because since we're talking about Mars square Neptune, it will be interesting to find out how the Mars return currently and the one that's upcoming will actually how it actually plays out by itself. Perhaps you can enable my screen sharing, right?
Sure. I think you should be able to now.
Okay. So let's check out. Can you see this screen right now?
I can.
So there are two bi-wheels. So on the left, I just want to quickly run through the inner circle is the Mars return planets, and the outer one is the US natal chart. And then the one on the right is the flipped version, in which the US natal chart is in the inner circle, and the Mars return is on the outer. So let's concentrate on the left, because the inner circle here represents the Mars return chart by itself. And I've plotted the one that's still active. And this is from 2nd of May, 2019. And this will last all the way up till 9th of April of this year, 2021. So a good like close to 2 years. And what I find really interesting is that, as I've mentioned earlier, the Neptune in transit in the Mars return already start to oppose the natal Neptune, all squaring the USA natal Mars, which forms a T-square. But then what's also important is that if you see where Mars is, because we're talking about Mars return chart on a country level, and Mars is actually very close to the midheaven in the Mars return chart. So that means a lot of division of ideas because Mars is in Gemini. And Mars, if we archetypally put it on a mundane level, it really talks about the forces which hold a state together or drive it apart in terms of aggression. And it's also about the collective need of a nation or society to have enemies and to express itself aggressively. And so the Mars return also shows in this close to 2 year cycle what helps a society to grow and to exert itself. But having Mars all the way high up in the sky, which means that there's really a potential since 2019, May, while this Mars return is active, that the nation as a whole will be acting divisively. It will start splitting. And it also shows that a lot of violence, because Mars rules violence, criminal acts as well as Mars, and also antisocial acts is also Mars. And of course, last but not least, Mars in mundane astrology also rules rebellions and also riots, in which we have that already.
That's right.
But what I find really, really interesting is that before this Mars return actually expires in early April of this year, we actually have was it a new moon? I think there's a new moon that is occurring on 13th of March of 2021, and it's at 23 Pisces, which is very close to where transit Neptune is right now. And if you see the inner circle of this Mars return chart, it actually squares Mars and squares Jupiter in a Mars return chart. And it's angular. It's like activating that T-square. What it actually tells me is that March 2021 can be another explosive month for the US.
Yes, because the action houses are very, very prominent. And yes, absolutely right. Mars is something which is all about, it has got quite an erratic, volatile nature.
Right.
But also we're talking about power here. Of course, Pluto rules power in modern astrology, but in ancient world, Mars is going to be the planet of power. So it could be showing some type of, with Neptune, in my opinion, some inability to act, inability to gain the power what, let's say, the government is hoping for. Because whatever Neptune touches in the chart, it kind of dissolves it. So, and I can imagine with that Neptune-Mars square, that people are going to start feeling being misled or misused or just being a pawn. And let's not forget actually that that Neptune in Virgo, which they have got natally, is all about healing the wounds from being slaves, and we want to be kind of fighting for our freedom in a sense. And maybe people are going to start feeling that, oh, we are just a pawn, you know, yeah, we are just the pawns in the, you know, in the society, and then we want to be breaking away, fleeing away from any type of chains. So this Neptune Mars also tells me that there is a possibility that people are going to be so decentralizing, so move into farms and move in little cities, because they want to be gardening, for instance. They want to be closer to their roots, or they want to be closer to seas and so forth. So that's also very, very possible. And that's why maybe some of the real estate or yeah, the land related topics might be suffering later on.
Because also what I find interesting is that in the 2019 Mars return chart, Mars actually opposes Jupiter. And it's pretty close. And we do have was it a recent total solar eclipse in December on December 14, 15,
That's
depending
right,
where
yeah.
you are, at 23, 24 of Sagittarius.
That's right.
You can see it squares all the angles in the Mars return.
Yeah.
And usually for total solar eclipse, the next 90 days after the eclipse, in which we end up in middle of March again, 2021, when that new moon in Pisces, 23 Pisces occur. So that's like another indication that people might be feeling, I think the word that you were looking for just now with Neptune is being dispossessed or forgotten by society. And they're almost like jilted, like a jilted lover would, the Neptune energy. And since natally USA has a Mars-Neptune square, it's like this kind of overly pushy, overly overdoing it, and like above the audacity of what's accepted in terms of fighting for your own freedom and fighting to be recognized, because Mars wants to be recognized as well.
Absolutely.
And since we have that Jupiter actually inflating Mars, but via opposition, is going to really make people take to the streets, Gemini, where Mars is, and really going to like show their what in their people will take to the streets and show what in their mind the ideal society should be. That is like part of their utopia, which is Neptune, which may or may not be grounded in reality, by the way, since we're talking about Neptune.
Yeah, Neptune is so much to do with illusions, right? But on a mundane level, it does signify social movement, and also it talks about medicine and hospitalization as well. So it could indicate that somehow the healthcare is going to be majorly impacted in US as well. And it could indicate that, for instance, when Neptune is so negatively impacted, it could indicate something to do with a collapse. So it could indicate political instability, some type of distortion, fraud, corruption. But you know, if we look at what could happen in the nature, then it could indicate actually landslides or some type of marine disasters, or even some type of gas leak or huge waves in the ocean, or some type of infection as well.
And also Neptune rules the Navy, the naval forces.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it could be some kind of weakening regarding that, since it's squaring Mars, or there can be activation of like their naval forces. There's something going on there. So I find that interesting. And
what are the positives of this aspect? Because Neptune does rule music and fashion also.
There is. Oh, and it also rules scandals.
Yeah.
So I think the latest scandal was the takedown of Alexander Wang, the fashion designer. So it's square, right? Usually square, as much as I want to try to be positive, but Mars is one of the truthful planets. In the Mars return, it's opposing Jupiter. What it tells me is that there's going to be a lot of whistleblowers who come out and tell the truth regarding someone. And there's been a lot of these kind of cases coming up. I think the latest one was that. I've not followed the whole blow up of that that fashion designers like shady past, but something's about to be surfaced. And it's almost like a takedown of whoever has been behind the scenes abusive and manipulative, and it's all flushed to the surface to be seen.
Yeah, it's very much about this Neptune and Mars for me is very much about secret services and even somehow the media comes to my mind as well. So I'm expecting maybe a media act or something is going on there as well. But on a positive note, Mars and Neptune could really give a very inventive, creative, and intuitive approach to people. And Mars can kind of offer Neptune a way out, different type of options from difficult situations. And it could really talk about a higher consciousness as well. At the end of the day, as we said, Neptune is the social movement. So people might be demonstrating some type of self-sacrifice, which not necessarily I'm talking about the common people, but somewhere on the hierarchy level. Or Neptune is very much is the guiding element, you know, by the ideas and the talent and the spiritual gurus. So maybe spirituality can be kind of, you know, elevated as well, even with a Mars square, which might be indicating for us that there will be, you know, some type of demonstrations or, you know, I don't want to do, we shouldn't be doing that too much spirituality.
I think from this Mars return chart, before we move on to the next consecutive Mars return chart, I'd just like to point out that natally, USA Mars is in the 7th house, but it's now brought into the Mars return 9th house. So there is like this, because 9th house is the mass media. And what it almost tells me is that there will be even more polarization of belief systems and open clashes. Mars in the 7th house natally, now brought to the 9th of belief systems and mass media. So from the mass media and differences in belief system, the polarization of different groups within USA's demography with their own different perceptions of truth and beliefs that divides the nation. What I'm trying to say is that the mass media will actually fuel the fire even more with whatever so-called facts, because Gemini rules facts, whatever reporting, factual reporting, inverted commas, because I'm always a bit skeptical of what they present. So whatever that happens in March of 2021 is like the prelude that will set the stage for the subsequent Mars return chart, in which we'll look at it right now, actually. So the Mars return right after the one that we just discussed occurs on 9th of April of this year. And the layout is the same, like I mentioned before. But what is really interesting to me is that the ascendant and the descendant in the Mars return chart is that 0 degrees of the cardinal signs, which means that it's going to be a really action-packed, event-filled period leading, because this Mars return actually leads us into 2022. Each Mars return is roughly around like 20 months or so. So this Mars return basically covers on many levels the majority of the time that transit Neptune actually squares USA Mars. So
Yes.
this one will be pretty, you know, action-packed, I would say. And there's because the ascendant in any return chart is the one that I look at, like what is the energy. And when it's at 0 degrees of a cardinal sign, it's like the change of a season. That's when it happens, like 0 degrees of Aries, Libra, Cancer, Capricorn. So there's an overarching theme of new beginnings, of what the USA actually stands for in terms of its presentation to the world. And this can be, it's almost like a totally new kind of image that will be painted to the world in terms of USA's presentation of itself on the world stage. Since we are talking about 0 degree of Capricorn, so it's almost like that new presentation of the USA's image will be more about not so much of what it can show to the stage out there, but turning that in and solving their internal problems first. That's what I got. That's what I got. And there's actually, was it in 2020? There's a solar eclipse at 0 degrees of Cancer. And that occurred on 21st of June 2020, and it is still unfolding. And if you see the descendant in the Mars return chart is at 0 degrees, so it's like it's going to activate that point further down the road. And the key dates I've actually looked at are 19th of December 2021 and 17th of September 2022. These are like the two, I would say, major turning points when I apply those dates to the Mars return chart. Like there's going to be some Martian kind of action going on regarding the USA.
At least a major scandal.
Yes, because
or at least a political movement. And my very much gut feeling is all about the feminine is going to rise significantly, and Neptune is the feminine power on a higher scale. So to be frank, I wouldn't be shocked if a female energy would become, or at least a feminine person would become a president, and it could be a male as well, of course, just with a lot more understanding, a lot more compassionate love, and so forth. But I kind of feel like there is going to be a female movement.
And also, I think the inevitable, I would say, rise in like more demonstrations and protests is actually captured by this Mars return Jupiter that's conjunct the USA moon, which represents the people. Yeah. So anything that Jupiter touches inflates, and the third house in any country's chart rule the streets. And that means that transit Jupiter is actually inflating that moon, so people will take to the streets more. Also, the 7th house in the Mars return chart actually conjunct USA's 6th house, 10th house, and 11th house ruler Venus. And 6th house, as we mentioned earlier, is regarding like diseases, illnesses. So they could also be on the papers, 10th house, because of that. They're still grappling with the pandemic, in other words. And then the 11th house, which is Venus root as well, by Placidus house system, really talks about redefining America's hopes and wishes for the future.
Unfortunately, the COVID situation can really be extended in the US, unfortunately, with this Neptune-Mars square.
Yeah, and I think the key dates, like I mentioned, that 0 degree Cancer eclipse will be unfolded 19th of December of 2021 and 17th September of 2022. So these are the key, plus minus 2 weeks on each side, and you can see something unfolding there, because it will stimulate the USA Venus as well. That natally Venus is out of bound in USA's chart as well. So
Interesting.
another indication. So Mars and Venus in the USA chart natally are both out of bounds, in other words. So
Also,
there's
because
that.
Neptune so much to do with marine and seas, oceans, and we have got the Saturn Jupiter conjunction whole sign house system in their third house on
Mm,
South Node, which I spoke about in the inauguration video as well, which I'm going to be posting today, so I will put the link above as well. But that is happening on the South Node, which is talking us,
yeah.
which is talking to us about losses, or at least it's a reminder that we need to be learning from our past mistakes. And the third house is very much to do in mundane astrology with trading, as
Mm,
well as social media. So how I'm seeing is that maybe some type of challenges in trading with overseas countries, or actually just something to do with the oceans and the seas, and maybe it's not going to be safe enough to, to travel or to eat from the ocean and the seas.
I also want to mention that transit Neptune squaring Mars and opposing USA's Neptune, it can also mean that there's going to be like an enhanced fanaticism,
Yeah.
nefariousness, and even like if brought to the extreme with that T square that's formed with transit Neptune, it can also become somewhat sadistic
Yeah.
in nature as well, like tendencies or activities over this period of time. But because it's a square to Mars, it can be justified as glorified actions.
Yes.
Like there's an inflation of like what I do is actually right because I'm like blah 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 blah. Whereas that by moral standards is actually not the case.
And
And
also with that Mars in the seventh house, the fugitives
yeah,
are very much in the picture as well. Who we allow to enter the country, who we know, something to do with the borders. With Neptune and Mars energy, we can really set unrealistic goals, and that might be accompanied by self-delusions. Or we tend to be acting in a wrong and destructive manner as well. Neptune and Mars can be quite cunning and insincere, even manipulative, because Neptune and Mars together is all about the hidden motives, the hidden desires, and implications for their actions as well. So Neptune Mars together very much talks about low and weak will and morals. It makes the energy very unreliable, misleading, very inconsistent. And Neptune is all about escapism. So here Mars is kind of looking for ways to escape responsibility, but still wanting to emerge victorious, or wants to win. But usually it's happening in a dishonest way.
I'm also thinking that because Mars rules needles, so Mars Neptune can be the nationwide vaccination program
Yeah.
that's going on right at the moment on a countrywide level. And I think there's going to be more questions than answers regarding the information of like the efficiency because when I see Mars square Neptune, it's like a botched attempt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And as you said, there's a sense of like insincerity. So there could be, and because Mars in the USA chart is in the sign of facts and figures, Gemini, and is squaring Neptune on both transit and natally. So there's this kind of whatever information that we get regarding what's inside the vaccine may or may not be
entirely true.
Entirely true is one thing, but maybe also that the antibodies it produces may only last for a short period of time, and then you have to go back a few months later just to
repeat
keep revaccinating yourself again and time again, and the long-term effects are still like unknown as of now. So we are just playing by ear. What I also want to mention is that the Mars returns 7th house, because 7th house also rule wars in this context, and is conjunct USA's 6th house ruler, which is Venus over here. And the 6th house in the country's chart rule like things like service, civil servants, trade unions, soldiers, armies, and national defense. It's also linked to public health, health workers, and health of the society. It's also talking about state housing schemes and also the working class. So there can be like a whole range of issues that might be kicked up that needs to be openly confronted, 7th house, openly confronted with over this Mars return period for the USA.
I do believe this is going to be related to tax issues. As I said, Neptune is the planet of inflation, deflation. So it talks about the money system because the higher octave of Venus. And I can imagine some unbearable tax coming to the US, common people and workers. So, and I can imagine that Mars is going to get frustrated there because of,
and also Neptune rules homelessness, and also Neptune also rules homelessness.
Yeah.
So maybe like the state housing scheme in the US cannot sustain the amount of people who's out of job from this pandemic, what the economic ramifications are. And so like it's like a 6th house is also debt. The national debt is at all-time high. So, I'm a bit like iffy because if we just go back to this Mars return, after this Mars return has done its job in 2022, Mars will actually go retrograde over USA's Mars 3 times.
There is going to be plenty of restructuring, and the Neptune brings hopes for us. But I usually describe Neptune as a very beautiful rose, which eventually going to lose its petals. So rebirth is definitely at the corner of the US. It's going to take a longer period of time, especially because of those retrograde periods. And Neptune's transits last for 2-3 years anyway.
Yeah. So
we're going to be feeling its impact till 2023. So yes, US, we wish you the very best luck, really. But
not forgetting
is looking a little bit scary.
Not forgetting that Mars is not forgetting that the USA is already like will be having their Pluto return coming soon in the background of all these things going on. So they are ready for rebirth, like what you said. And the USA will have its Pluto return on 20th of February next year, 11th of July next year, and 28th of December next year. So the whole of 2022, while this Mars return chart is still active, they will go through a Pluto return, which is the rebirth.
Exactly.
Rebirthing process.
Well, we will be making a video on the Pluto return for US for sure, because that's going to be a longer topic to discover. And it's worth having a look at the exact moment of when Pluto returns and then seeing where the other planets are, what type of interactions they are making to Pluto, because that is going to be giving us a taste of what is the next 200 years will be like in the US.
Since 1770s. Since 1776.
Yes, exactly. So
it takes that long. Yeah, since its independence. So I would like to just move on very briefly to the solar return that's currently active.
Let's have a look.
And this one started 4th of July of last year, and this will last till like 4th of July of 2021. What's really amazing is that this chart actually has already a hint that a female president will be in power. Like, why do I say that? I'll just like briefly run it through. The ascendant in the solar return chart for the US in 2020 is at 28 of Scorpio, which is very close to the end of a sign, 28 degrees, and it's in the sign of Scorpio, which can rule some kind of rebirth, death, transformation, regeneration, and all that. And if I were to consider the ascendant, it's actually sextile Saturn at 29 degrees of Capricorn, and it all forms like a yod shape with the North Node in Gemini in the 8th house. This actually tells me that the situation now may not be for long, and that it also tells me that over this solar return period, the nation's focus will be on the death, inverted commas, metaphorically and or literally, of someone elderly and very important.
29 degrees, a karmic degree. It does talk about endings and basically opening doors for new possibilities to enter.
It is. And then,
yeah.
Since we're talking about a solar return, the sun also represents in mundane astrology the leader, the president, or the ruler of a country. And it's also in the 8th house.
Yes.
Already doesn't really look, yeah.
It could indicate some health issues with top-notch leaders.
Yes. And
do I see well that we've got the Scorpio rising as well?
Yes, Scorpio rising. Definitely.
And that's almost on 29 degree also, right?
Almost.
Yeah. So something is coming to an end, and that absolutely makes sense anyway. With the Pluto return, the rebirth is needed, and the solar return chart also indicates that to us as well, that something completely new is gonna start, but it's gonna take time to build something out of it, because people will be confused with that Neptune-Mars square. Whenever a new era starts, this 29-0 degree kind of energy in astrology, it takes time for the subconscious to kind of get used to the new events. So, and one of the reasons, Neptune is always about going with the flow, but Mars wants to fight against it. So, this is going to be the time when people going to have to accept what is happening in a certain way. And only, again, pulling together, I think that's going to be the important thing, not necessarily fighting each other, getting together and then having a higher cause, Neptune, having a vision where we want to get to.
Yeah, and the sun is clipped in between the vertex and also Vesta as well, an asteroid. Usually when I think about endings, somehow Vesta is in the picture as well. It's almost like the flame is being put out of sorts. And it's also in the dark house, the 8th house, which represents like, death in many ways. So what I'm trying to say is that whoever that's in power initially might get swapped out because of some crisis, 8th house. The ruler of the country will undergo crisis of sorts. And the next thing I want to bring to your attention is that moon, which is out of bound in the solar return chart and is in the sign of Capricorn. And the ruler of that moon is Saturn at 29 degrees of Capricorn. An erratic degree, or the last degree, but it's retrograde. So it's someone that has been in front of us before.
That's right.
And because the moon actually rules the sun in the solar return. So so the moon actually is a kind of like a pivotal planet to look at in terms of energy. And moon is out of bound and it's in the sign of Capricorn. What this tells me is that a potential dark skin, because Capricorn, right? Saturn,
Yeah.
melanated, melanin is also, Capricorn, Saturnian, or someone who's elderly or advanced in age. Since we're talking about moon is a female.
Yes. And also Capricorn is the sign of government, agriculture, and something to do with the economics, basically.
Yes.
So the economical rebirth is very much in the chart as well. Kind of a new movement.
And the moon in the solar return forms a trine to the solar return midheaven. But if we plot the natal chart, the solar return moon actually squares the midheaven. So this tells me that it's even more probable that some female figure, dark-skinned, melanated, or elderly, one of the three, I think you guys who's watching the video roughly know one of them is who, but it can be someone else as well. I'm just throwing my net further out for that matter. And when she takes over, before this solar return is done in July 2021, social stability will be further disrupted.
Well, guys, you have got plenty to think about.
Yeah.
We will be back with a Pluto return chart at some point, probably in the next couple of months, because I think it's always good to get ready what the energies are telling us, so you can, guys, prepare yourself. Thank you, Donny, for joining me today to have a look at the US Sibley chart. It was a pleasure as usual.
I just want to have a ending statement. Although what we mentioned in this video is or was really not the most positive, but I think at this point in time, we just need to, with every low point, there's always an opportunity. So do have that in mind. And it's not just all like doom and gloom. There's always a rainbow on the other side of it.
And that's exactly Neptune, the rainbow.
Yes.
Right? Just finding the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Right.
Thank you, Donny. And have a blessed weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.